How does that make you feel, Mike? How are you feeling these days?
Cautiously optimistic, I'd say. I have to remind everyone we did start the season 12-3
Mhm.
and then sort of got sideways. But I do think it feels different having a player of Jimmy's caliber added to the mix. Frankly, the other guys that have stepped up and played great. I think we're in a really good spot heading down the stretch of the season, but I remain cautiously optimistic, knowing that anything can happen.
Hey everybody, Tim Kawakami here at TK Show, recording from the home studio, and very glad to have as my guest. I think the second or third time, I can't even count now, on the show. Always glad to have the Warriors general manager, Mike Dunleavy. Mike, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me again. It's good to be back.
It's good to have you. Sounding good, looking good. I'll just throw it out there. As the general manager who pulled off a trade that suddenly is key to 11-2 run. I know it's not just about you. I know it's not just about one person, but how are you feeling these days? Or obviously the Warriors are playing tonight. We're recording this on, I can't even remember what day it is. Whatever day today is, Monday. The Warriors are playing tonight against Portland. But whenever you listen to this, as we talk, they're on 11-2 run since Jimmy Butler's arrival. How does that make you feel, Mike? How are you feeling these days?
Yeah, I mean, cautiously optimistic, I'd say. I have to remind everyone we did start the season 12-3
Hmm.
and then sort of got sideways. So, um, in some ways, we've seen this before, but I do think it feels different. It is different having a player of Jimmy's caliber added to the mix, and frankly, the other guys that have stepped up and played great since kind of the start of the year. Whether it's Moody, it's Podzimski, Guy Santos is playing well. So I think we're in a really good spot heading down the stretch of the season, but injuries, anything like stuff can just change at the snap of the fingers. So I remain cautiously optimistic, knowing that anything can happen.
I was talking to Steve Kerr, always interesting, the other day, and he was saying he was with you July 1st in the off season, and we know the big names that were involved and played, Paul George, Laurie Markkinen, and that you were like got back to him and said, "Hey, we're gonna sit back. We're gonna get some really good players, and you end up with Kyle Anderson, Anthony Melton, Buddy Hield, and then we're gonna see. We're gonna go see at the deadline, and that makes sense. I know you guys are always a far thinking team, but did you really like say make that calculation and say, let's just kind of reset, kind of a soft reset with kind of the middle of our roster, and then maybe we really do something big at the deadline? Was it that kind of plan?
Yeah, I mean that's the plan, and that was the plan, and a lot of it really was searching for an impact player. It just there wasn't anything that made sense for us at the time, so it led us to the backup plan, which was kind of to kick the can down the road a little bit, and that definitely came with some risk. If you're leaning on somebody or a player being available later down the road. Um, that doesn't always come. That doesn't always happen. Fortunately, with the situation with Miami and Jimmy, he was there and we were able to get him. But at the time, I think the thought process in free agency and in July was, balancing this idea of impatience and also being
Mhm.
disciplined. And it was tempting to try and just do something and roll out a team to start the year where we felt like, we got this guy or whatever, but it just nothing it felt right to do in terms of what we had to give up and who we were getting. And so to stick with what you thought was right and then end up with getting what you'd hope for, definitely feels like you have a good process in place and you're doing the right stuff.
The Steve and Steph comments kind of in the weeks leading up. Hey, we're not going to throw everything out here. We're not going to, we got to think about the future. How did you read that? Was that through conversations you had with them? I think a lot of people viewed it differently. I certainly, and I've talked with Steph about it. It was like they just were saying like we don't have to do it right now. But as a general manager, and you're seeing these comments, are you having to clarify it with them, or did you know what they meant at the time?
Well, those guys are all great in terms of team players, organizational players. They do want what's best for the franchise, but they want to win. And so the main thing I knew, whether no matter what they said publicly or privately, I knew our team had to get better. We all saw it, right? We saw our record, we saw the way we were playing. Um, that was an easy decision in terms of what we have to do something to improve. And so I appreciate them putting that out there. And maybe it was to take a little pressure off, or maybe it was just I guess what do you say, under promise and over deliver, that type of
Mhm.
thing. But I get where they were coming from. Like nobody wants to give up the farm to get something that maybe still with where we were at record wise, not good enough. I think that's maybe the beauty of this trade with Jimmy is I think all in all, we didn't give up a ton and we were able to get a highly impactful two-way player back. So yeah, I mean, I think where we're sitting today is a whole lot better than where we were a month or two ago.
One thing I hear from people who know you well, and I am getting certainly from you, from your what 2 years now, or not quite 2 years as general manager, is that you're a realist. As Joe said it, you're a realist. You don't sit there and think, okay, we're really way better than we're playing right now. You make clear decisions, and it can be kind of tough decisions. Are you? I don't say surprising yourself, but did you know you had that? Like, I can make these clear-eyed decisions. I mean, you traded for Dennis Schroeder and then you traded him away, and a couple weeks later, that's not the easiest thing in the world. Is this just something you walked into this job having? Did you develop over like your time as assistant? Where is this kind of realism coming from?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I knew taking this job, it's a unique situation where with kind of where we are in our timeline of things with the roster and where it's all been the last decade or so. The one thing I knew is like there's going to be some tough times with it, but most importantly, I got to make the right decisions and I got to be willing to make tough decisions. And like you said, being real, being honest. I think that's probably one of my biggest strengths. I'm not gonna come home at night after a game that we beat a bad team by 20 points and all of a sudden say we have everything fixed. I think I see things pretty emotionalist in some ways, and sometimes I think my wife or my close friends are like, "What's wrong with you?" But that's I think I think it's in this business, it's probably the right lens to look at things. You have to be real. You have to, um, you know, state and I do this with Joe at times, and he the phone can be quiet on the other
Mhm.
end when I said, when I say, Joe, we got to be careful. We're weak in this area. We're not good here. And I think at times he doesn't like it, but he appreciates it. And I think that's the way you got to do in this business.
Were you like that as a player, even like, looking around? I mean, I don't want you to be tough on rosters you're on or over optimistic, but were you able to kind of see that clearly as you were playing through at a really long, successful NBA career?
I think I learned to look at the game probably just growing up and for the coaches that I played for, Coach K and Scott Skiles, Rick Carlisle, Tom Thibodeau. I think you look at it from the lens of, how do we get beat? How does this not work? And I think in some ways it's a good way to look at this side of things from a front office perspective. And what's going to get you beat here? How does this fail? And then you can work back from there. And I guess I looked at things like that as a player. Yeah, in a game, in a big moment, you're up by four with 30 seconds left, or oh, okay, you don't want to foul a three-point shooter, like and give up a 4-point play. That's how you get beat. Anything else, your odds of winning are going to remain really high. But you do that one thing, and I think it's the same thing in this job. Is like you make one big mistake, and it can really set you back not only a season but multiple seasons. And I think that's the proper way to look at things when you're trying to do this job because it's tough. It's a tough job as it is.
Kerr mentioned that, when you guys were losing some of those close games at the end, that you guys had talks, and he said it was never challenging from you, but it was you brought it up. There are things we can do better, and how do we do it? Are these conversations you've always had with Steve, or kind of those developed recently? And like, what's the communication? What's the messaging that you're trying to communicate to him in those conversations?
Yeah, Steve and I have a great rapport. A lot of that's not only from the last couple of years of being GM, but being assistant GM with Bob over the last 5, 6 years, getting to know Steve, how he coaches, how he operates. I mean, the best thing we have in our relationship is I can always be honest with him, and he knows it's not. I'm never coming at him in a way of questioning him. We're trying to problem solve together, and I think there's a mutual respect for that. And it doesn't. I know it because my dad coached. My dad was a general manager. It doesn't do anybody any good for me to walk in the game after a tough loss and say, well, why didn't we foul there? Or what are we doing here? Like that just is so pointless. And I think knowing that helps me and it helps my relationship with Steve. But again, I think when we have our conversations, it's putting our heads together and figuring out how do we get this thing right. And we've had a lot of conversations over the course of the year. And sometimes it's about coaching and like tactical stuff, which is his area. And then sometimes it's about roster stuff and getting the team better, which is my area. But we do it together, we do it well, and it's a fun dynamic for me.
think we've all seen what Jimmy's added. There's so many. It's a lot of things. But when you looked at what was necessary before you made the trade for him, what is it exactly you think that he's really filled for you guys? What is the difference? That what areas do you see this team being better just because Jimmy Butler's on the team?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the measurable stuff on the court. Obviously getting to the free throw line, scoring the basketball, his passing, making his teammates better. Those things that we can actually measure with all different types of metrics. And then there's just his presence, which is, I don't know how you measure that, but that's affected our whole team from the minute he walked in our locker room. And it's affected our young guys. It's affected our coaching staff. It's affected, Steph, Draymond, some of the greatest winners of all time. But to get another guy in the mix for them and for our whole team, it's really done wonders. And like I said when we started, we're cautiously optimistic about this thing. We've got a lot of work to be done and a long way to go here, but I think we're on the right track.
You mentioned your playing days. Obviously, you were Jimmy's teammate. It's been much discussed, but Kerr said you went to Steve. I said I play with him. I can vouch for him as a player. You're going to love playing for him. What did you like really? Why did you like playing with him so much in Chicago?
I mean, two things simple: IQ and competitiveness. And those are two things that Steve lives by and pushes. I hear it all the time when we're talking, whether it's before games, after games, days off. Steve's always talking about that with players we have on our team, players we're trying to acquire, players in the draft. You can talk about the skill and all that, but as people and humans, he loves IQ, high IQ guys. He loves competitors. And Jimmy's as high as you get in those regards. So, I thought just knowing that stuff, having been on the court with him, play with him a few seasons, I know he brings those things and would tremendously help our team. And right now, it's playing out pretty well.
Safe to say that if you had made the deal or were talking about making the deal a few weeks before you ended up doing it, it would have been cost a lot more, a lot more, a lot more.
You know, I don't know
Mm.
necessarily about that, which is to say, man, we should have done it a whole lot sooner. But I think you kind of want to figure out all that's out there leading up to the trade deadline and explore everything and make sure you're doing the right thing. And so we did that. But yeah, in retrospect, I think the price was the price. Miami was good. Miami was fair about it. Didn't change much. So I guess you could look back and say we probably should have done it a little sooner based on the way things have gone.
It might cost more. That's what I'm saying. It might have cost another draft pick or two, I would imagine. Was that the kind of the negotiation, or was it pretty well settled and you were looking at other things?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think most of the time to get things done sooner than later, it does cost more. However, with this situation and Jimmy and the known entity of him wanting to be traded and Miami being open to moving him, I think they were just open to moving him, and they had
Mm,
a fair price for it, and I think we hit that. But I don't know. I don't know that it would have been that much more earlier on in the process. These conversations were going on for a while, so I mean, it didn't change much, frankly, over the
okay.
couple weeks that we did it. So, um, I think it's a good deal for both sides, and we got a player we needed, and they got some good players and a draft pick and all that, so it landed well.
There was another player. I'm not going to ask you to say the player's name that you were in discussions with. Just that I've heard that was a lot of work to get to that place. What's that like when you got a Butler trade, you've got this other player trade, and you know the Butler trade can be done. You're working on this other one. Does that just how many layers does that add to these discussions?
Yeah, a lot. It's all problem solving and scenarios you're trying to work through and figure out. And ultimately the landing spot's got to be what makes us the best team for this year and moving forward. And we took all that stuff into account. And there's a lot of things cooking, a lot of things on the board, but I do feel comfortable and confident to say like where we landed was the best possible way we could have landed this thing, and not only for the rest of this season but moving forward. So we feel good about it, but it's a lot to unwind and looking back upon it. So many different iterations and discussions and things to figure out. I mean, it's fun but challenging and all that in one.
What's it like to go to Joe and say, the best thing to make this deal work is we're going to give him 2 years? And I know it's actually really one because he had the player option, but you are committing to 2 years and 111 or whatever it is. Is that an easy discussion to have with Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's well, anytime you want to pay a ton of money out on anything, Joe's it's going to raise some eyebrows from Joe, and he's going to want to understand why. And I think the why on that is this is the commitment we're making, not only the Warriors to Jimmy, but Jimmy to us. And that's something we want a relationship. We want this thing to not just be a short-term rental type deal. And it lines up with Steph, it lines up with Draymond. This is the deal that makes the most sense. And, if he plays the way we believe he can play and the way we've looked at and scouted and evaluated him, he's this level of a player. And I think Joe understood that and was good with it.
Given what he was going through in Miami, and we know he's gone through in other places, is there any way to have a discussion with Jimmy? Like, we can't have you coming to us in a year and saying, I need another, extension. Like, we need to know that we're just good for these 2 years plus, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why the terms of the deal are the terms of the deal. But, most importantly, I think knowing Jimmy, understanding what makes him tick, and also knowing our environment, our culture, and what it's like here with, Steve, who's been the coach here for a long time, and then we have the players like we do with Steph and Draymond. Feel really confident and comfortable we can bring a player like Jimmy into the mix, or any player for that matter, and they're going to be really happy. They're going to get into the fold. They're going to fit in seamlessly. I think that's a huge part of our comfort level with this thing is our group, our culture. And for me as a general manager, I'm lucky to be able to have that, to say, hey, we can add anybody we feel like is necessary under any circumstances. And that's reflective of what Steve and Steph and these guys have done.
I was in Salt Lake City the night the trade went down, and that locker room was really interesting. I'm sure you've heard about it. And my immediate sense was that the reason why they're so sad about losing Wiggins is the reason why Jimmy is going to work here. It's like that locker room takes players in, or I don't know, maybe that's a little bit oversaying it, but like that locker room can address personalities and talents and unique things and welcome them in the way obviously we saw Andrew's career just take off in 22. I guess, is that a little bit you're talking about? Like this is a culture that fits different people and cares about them. And then the players, like Andrew obviously didn't want to be traded. Like these are players that feel tied into this because of what you have there.
Yeah, I mean, look, Steve, our ownership, our players over the last decade or so built an ecosystem where guys want to be here. Guys are really happy. They love coming into work. They love competing. We've had a tremendous amount of success. So, and when you are here, you're part of the family. You're part of this group, and it's great to be a part of. And so, when you have to make tough decisions, you have to make moves, and guys move on, and guys come in. It's hard. It's like kicking your kid out or sending them to
Mhm.
boarding school or something like that. It is. I mean, a lot of teams talk about it and preach it, but there's definitely a family atmosphere and environment here that matters and is real. And so when we lose guys, especially a guy like Wiggs, who'd been here, 6 years, won a championship, so many great victories, like that's not hard. That's not easy. And I think that was reflective in the locker room in Utah after the trade. And it's tough. It's definitely, I told the guys, I mean, for me, the trade deadline is, such an active period. It's where as a general manager you could do so much, but I hate it. It's the worst time of year because that means we're going to have to move some guys on and flip in some pieces. And this is, there's a personal side to all this for our guys. And Wiggs, tough. I mean, he's got two young kids, just had a baby, so it's like I hate doing that, but this is what you go back to about being a realist and making the right decisions for the franchise in this position. That's my job.
You've traded Jordan Poole. You've traded the guy you traded Jordan Poole for. I mean, we let Chris Paul go. You've traded the guys you signed. Two of the three that you signed, you've traded Dennis Schroeder after trading for him. I know it's the business, but that kind of activity, trader Mike Dunleavy. I mean, did you foresee you being that kind of active general manager, or you're saying, or maybe you just understand like your previous answer, like you were coming in an interesting time for this franchise that you knew there were going to be some difficult decisions to be made.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to predict what's going to happen. I didn't know maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, whenever I took the job, it's like immediately we're going to start just doing deals. And I
Mhm.
think as the cycles have gone through, yeah, we traded Jordan, but last summer, um, we signed some guys in free agency. No huge trade moves or anything like that. This cycle around in the trade deadline for sure. So it's just part of it. I get it. And it entails making some tough decisions and then having some tough conversations with some guys in this case who've, whether it's Jordan or Wiggs, who've won championships here, or CP, who's first ballot Hall of Famer and was awesome for us for a year. And the main thing through all this is just communication. You got to be real. You got to be honest, and just be upfront, and have some sympathy for it. I've been through it as a player.
Yes, you have.
And I know what it's like. Totally get it to be traded in the middle of the season, uproot a family, all that, change teams in the off season with free agency. So it doesn't make it any easier. Probably makes it harder because I know what it's like. But that's the job. That's what you have to do.
Do you flash back to you were part of a big trade when the Warriors traded you to the
Yeah,
Pacers? Do you flash back to that at all in the trade deadline moments when you're talking about trading some pretty well established players?
I do. I mean, I think about it a lot of times. Certainly with our culture and environment, I think it is tough to be traded from here. Guys really
Mhm.
enjoy it on a day-to-day basis, but there's a lot of guys across the league that are frankly, they're looking for a new home. And I think, my time with the Warriors initially, when I got traded, I wasn't probably as disappointed when I got traded to Indiana because I was probably more open to a new
Mhm.
start, fresh beginning. And so I think some guys are like that, and I even remember when we traded Jordan, talked to him, just telling him, like, I know he was caught off guard by it, but I ultimately thought, hey, this could be a really good thing for you. You're gonna have an opportunity to start and have a bigger role. And so you got to look at the brighter side on things at times. And I think that's probably the proper approach when trades happen.
Talk a little bit about Jonathan Kuminga. He's been out for a long time now, and I assume his return is nearing. And Steve's been very clear. We're playing great. He's been out for a long time. Kind of let's slow play this. He doesn't need to rush back into it. As the general manager, obviously you want the team to win as much as possible, but knowing he's got this contractual situation, how much does that all come into play in your mind? Or are you just like, listen, whatever we get out of him, we get out of him, and then we'll deal with the decision on his contract in the offseason?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest things are for JK individually is getting him completely healthy where he feels good and feels like he can help this team. And I think team wise, getting him back in the fold and recognizing with JK playing at his best raises our ceiling. So how do we figure all that out? How do we all make it work? And hopefully he'll be back here soon. But I know he's been working hard. He's been watching our team. So we hope it's seamless, but just because he's not a new player, he's been with our team
Mhm.
for a few years, so he knows the ins and outs and all that. So as long as he gets his conditioning back, his kind of like his rhythm, his comfort, all that, I think things will go really well. But right now, in terms of like this offseason and contract and all that, I mean, our pure focus is these last 19, 20 games and getting in the playoffs and winning each round. So I don't think we put there's nothing else to really discuss or think about in that regard right now.
It's not a new thought, but man, if he looks at Jimmy Butler's game and says, "I can do some of that," you can really imagine some interesting developments for Jonathan Kuminga. Do you see the similarities or kind of like a formula for Jonathan to take a look at some of the things that Jimmy does?
Yeah, for sure. I think JK is smart. He's observant, so I'm sure he's been watching. And I've always felt like with Jonathan, his play type is very similar to Jimmy. For me, being a teammate of Jimmy, seeing him grow from first year to second to third, the steps that he took, I always thought Jonathan, some of the things those guys do that are similar. And I know right now, if you're watching Jimmy, you got to watch, his footwork, his
Mhm.
cutting, his screening, how well he gets open, just setting simple screens, his physicality around the rim to be able to get fouled, to be able to get an angle, all those tricks of the trade that he has that Jimmy's learned over the course of his career are things as Jonathan, gets more and more experience in this league. If he's watching that stuff and picking up those things, I think he'll be a tremendous player.
Would two of those kind of players on the floor together? I think they would magnify each other. I mean, I could see there could be maybe some overlap that wouldn't be great, but could you see those two guys flourishing together on the floor?
I can. I mean, I think the biggest thing that will help them both is when you talk about Jimmy. I mean, he's so unselfish. His passing and IQ and the things that he understands with the game. I think that can help make JK a better player. And JK brings a level of finishing and things at the rim that nobody else on our team has. So when you put those two things, together, I think it gives us a chance to be really good and those guys to work well. So we're looking forward to seeing how it plays out and how they kind of operate. But yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, we should be optimistic.
You talked about, you want to be cautiously optimistic, but there's some teams ahead of you that you might match up in the first round or eventually that you've played very well. Now that's most of that is before you got Jimmy, but like, do you start thinking about like these? There's some potential to make again, this violates the cautious optimism. I'm sure the cautious part of it, but do see a way, a path that you could make a pretty deep run here?
Well, I think it's natural as we see here to start looking at the matchups and who you may play, and if you can get past that team, who's next. But it's so hard. I mean, this thing is jumbled up, not only with 6 to 11, but also at the top after OKC, kind of 2 to 4, 5 is tight. So it's just impossible at this point to predict or want to choose your matchup. I think the most important thing for us is health and playing well as we go down the stretch, and we do that. This is a team that's experienced, whether it's Steph, Steve, Draymond, Jimmy in his own right, in the postseason basketball. These guys have been there, done that, and so that gives us a tremendous amount of confidence that we can win any series we're in. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but I think we're probably less concerned about matchups and who we may play, and most concerned about playing well and staying healthy.
Question I ask you and Joe every single time. I ask Steph, just the weight, the responsibility of Steph's, however many final prime years he has. This is clearly still a prime year. We're all watching it. It's hard to address as general manager because you want to do what's best for the franchise. Clearly, you just want to win. But is there, as you are going into a trade deadline and coming out of it, saying we do have to have some responsibility, Steph Curry here. We do have some sense that we need to make sure he's playing meaningful games, like he says, and some satisfaction that you might have achieved that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy in the sense from him. One, he's earned it, and two, he continues to play so well. So it's like it's a no-brainer. What else? What are we going to do? Fold the cards and
Mhm.
and start anew? No, no, no. This guy and Draymond too. I mean, Draymond still is playing at such a high level in so many areas. It's the decision is made for us. We got to try and be the best team we can be, and but again, just because you don't do something like in last summer, or what are they doing? They're sitting on their hands. It doesn't mean that you can't. There's that line between impatience and discipline, and I think we're walking it pretty well right now. But the clock is ticking. These guys aren't getting any younger, and inevitably, they will age out. And so, keeping an eye on the future too is important in this position, and we'll continue to do that.
One of the young players I want to mention is Quentin Post, and you were positive about him when you drafted him. Clearly, you liked him. You drafted him. Um, are there things that he's doing better than you thought he would this fast, or is this kind of what you foresaw in him?
Yeah, well, maybe this is, as you mentioned, the realist in me. I think with all these guys we draft, whether it's Quentin this year or Brandon and Trace last year, I just never place any expectations on them as rookies to perform and help the team win. It's just so hard to do to come in this league and do that. But Quentin's a little bit older. He's experienced. He's got a skill set. He's a mature kid. So, Steve was sort of pushing for it over the course of the season, knowing that we need some outside shooting, especially from the big position of hey, get Quentin through Santa Cruz, and maybe we can get him some minutes as the season goes on. And I kind of pumped the brakes on that to Steve, admittedly, a little bit, like, let's give him some time. And I think they brought him in the fold, at the right moment. And I would say, as much as Jimmy's helped us with at the trade deadline and added him into the mix, Quentin's done some stuff that's energized this group as well. I mean, when you see this guy making a three and the bench going nuts, and he's a great young guy to have around. People have rallied around him, and he's added a dimension that we haven't had here in a while. So it's exciting, and he knows he's got a lot of work to do and got to keep getting better. But right now, he's helping us win games, and that's awesome to see as a rookie.
Steve Kerr pushing for the rookie to play. That's a flip of the reputation, at least a little bit. That
He likes to reach around on the shelf and look at the toys and see which ones he can play with. So inevitably I thought that would probably come around with Quentin. And to Quentin's credit, he sees the opportunity and playing really well.
All right, we'll end this with a version of a question I've asked you before. I ask all my guests. Mike Dunleavy, what's your favorite TV show right now?
So normally I'm like, I give pause. I don't really know what to say because I'm so busy studying for the draft or anything, watching our team. But I have had some time between All-Star break. I did a trip over to Europe for some scouting, so I had a long plane ride. I'm on the Taylor Sheridan train.
Mhm.
Landman, really enjoyed that. Lioness, a couple seasons there. I watched Yellowstone previously, and just some good entertaining television on Paramount Plus with that guy and what he does. So enjoying that stuff right now.
And he has a lot of it. That's the thing. It just keeps coming.
Yeah.
It just keeps
Just keeps
coming.
it, exactly. Lots of it's just lots of action,
Mhm.
excitement, suspense. They're just good fun shows to watch.
You don't he's a volume shooter, and I think,
Yeah. Yeah.
and pretty high efficiency too, given
Yeah.
the popularity of his shows.
And he acts well, he acts as well.
Yes.
He's in the shows, so he does it all.
And he's always, dating models while in as the character that he's in. But hey, if you're running the show, maybe you're just gonna do that. All right, Mike, listen, I appreciate the time as always, great conversation, and, very interesting times for the Warriors, and it's a good mood in that locker room these days. I saw you walking in the hallway, and you were joking that you were allowed in there, but I'm sure you're often in there, and the mood is good, and why
Yeah.
wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't it be?
No, it's good. It's nice to be around, and hopefully we keep it going.
All right, Mike, listen, appreciate it. Thanks so much. That's the show for today, everybody.
Thanks, Tim.